You wake up. Your eyes open. You can see your room exactly as you left it. The same ceiling, the same doorway, the same sliver of light under the door. And you cannot move. Not your arms, not your legs, not even your voice. Somewhere in the room, you're certain something is with you. Has this ever happened to you? Be honest, because if it has, you're about to hear something that should be impossible. Millions of people describe this exact experience. Not similar, not kind of like it. The exact same paralysis, the exact same pressure on the chest, the exact same sense of a presence in the room. People in Newfoundland, people in Japan, people in Nigeria, total strangers who never met, never read the same books, never shared a single word of language. Here's the part that should keep you watching. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly why this happens, and the actual answer is stranger and more precise than it's just a weird dream. But I'm not going to tell you yet. First, I want you to sit with how strange this really is. Because the deeper you look, the less this looks like a coincidence, and the more it looks like evidence of something built directly into being human. In 1963, a graduate student named David Hufford experienced this himself. Wide awake, paralyzed, certain something was in the room. Most people have this happen once, feel deeply unsettled, and never speak of it again, assuming no one else would understand. Hufford did the opposite. He spent the next several decades of his career tracking down people who'd felt the exact same thing, in places that had never exchanged a single idea with each other, interviewing them one at a time, writing down every detail, looking specifically for the moment the accounts would start to diverge. They never really did. He eventually called this the experiential source hypothesis, the idea that these cultures didn't learn the same story from each other at all. They had the same experience, independently, and only afterward did each one build its own folklore around it. In Newfoundland, fishing communities had a name for it: the old hag, an old woman who sits on your chest, pinning you down, impossible to move. In Japan, it's called kanashibari, bound in metal. In Nigeria, ogun oru. In Hong Kong, ghost oppression. In Scandinavia, there's a word mara for the exact same pressing presence. And that word is where the English language got the term nightmare from, centuries before anyone used it to mean just a bad dream. Different language, different religion, different century in some cases, nearly identical description. A sensed presence, pressure on the chest, paralysis, overwhelming dread. Here's a question worth sitting with. If this were just a scary story, passed from person to person, why would isolated cultures, separated by oceans, with no shared history, end up telling the same story anyway? The written record goes back further than most people assume. In 1664, more than 3 centuries before anyone had heard the words REM sleep, a Dutch physician published a case history of a woman who described, in her own words, that the devil lay upon her and held her down. Not a folktale, a medical record, someone writing down in careful clinical language symptoms that match almost word for word what people still describe today. One of the most striking records of all isn't a document. It's a painting. In 1781, the artist Henry Fuseli completed a work called The Nightmare. A sleeping woman, a small demonic figure crouched on her chest, and a wild-eyed horse pushing through the curtain behind her. Fuseli painted this more than 200 years before a single scientist could explain what he was actually depicting. He returned to the subject of dreams and nightmares again and again throughout his career, which has led some to suspect he may have painted directly from his own experience. Sleep researchers now regularly point to this exact painting as one of the earliest detailed records of the same experience we're describing. A copy of it is even known to have hung, more than a century later, in the office of Sigmund Freud. So here's where we are: a graduate student's personal nightmare, fishing villages in Newfoundland, temples in Japan, a Dutch doctor's casebook from 1664, a famous painting from 1781, all describing the same 3 things: a presence, a pressure, a paralysis, none of them talking to each other. So what is actually happening? Here's the answer, and it starts with something your brain does to you every single night, without exception. During REM sleep, the stage where your most vivid dreams happen, your brainstem sends out a chemical signal that switches off your voluntary muscles almost entirely. Researchers call it REM atonia. It exists for a very good reason. Without it, you would physically act out every dream you have. In a rare condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, that's exactly what happens. People punch, kick, and thrash through their dreams, sometimes injuring themselves or the person sleeping beside them. Sleep paralysis is almost the opposite failure. Normally, atonia switches on and off cleanly, in sync with your consciousness. You fall asleep, atonia begins. You wake up, atonia ends. Sometimes, that handoff fails. Your conscious mind wakes up first, your eyes open, your awareness returns completely. But the signal telling your body to stay still hasn't switched off yet. You are fully awake and fully paralyzed at the exact same time. That's the mechanism. That's why you can't move. But it doesn't on its own explain the part that should really bother you. Why does everyone see almost the same thing? Here's the second half of the answer, and it's the part that connects every account we've covered so far. In this paralyzed state, your brain is still partly running dream generation software, even though your eyes are open, taking in the real room around you. The result is a hallucination layered directly on top of reality, and that hallucination isn't random. Psychologist J. Alan Shine studied thousands of first-hand accounts and found the experience reliably breaks down into 3 recurring ingredients. A sensed presence, pressure, usually on the chest, and unusual bodily sensations, floating, vibrating, a feeling of leaving your body entirely. Some people report being lifted toward the ceiling, fully aware, fully certain it's happening, even though they never actually leave the mattress. Why these 3, specifically? One leading explanation points to threat detection. Your amygdala, the brain region most responsible for scanning your environment for danger, doesn't fully power down during this state. It's actively searching the room for something that could hurt you, using real visual information, fed through a system that's still half dreaming. An ambiguous shadow at the edge of the room gets filled in by the most ancient, most universal fear available. Not a specific monster, just a presence. Combine that with the chest pressure many people report, likely caused by the shallow, rapid breathing that's completely normal during REM sleep. Misread by a frightened, half-dreaming brain as something physically pressing down on you, and you have the 2 ingredients nearly every culture's version of this experience shares. The name, the shape, the folklore built around it, is where culture finally gets to speak. An old woman in Newfoundland, a demon in Fusili's Georgian London, bound metal in Japan. Same architecture, different decoration. That's the mechanism, and that's why the hallucination looks the way it does, everywhere it's ever been described. Some researchers have even connected this same 3-part hallucination to a much more modern kind of story. Waking unable to move, a felt presence, sometimes bright light, sometimes the sensation of a small, quiet figure standing over the bed. The classic description of an alien abduction maps, in striking detail, onto a sleep paralysis episode. Same 3 ingredients, reinterpreted through a 20th century cultural lens instead of a medieval or folkloric one. Sleep paralysis typically lasts from a few seconds to about 2 minutes, and it resolves completely harmlessly the moment atonia finally catches up with your consciousness. It's more common during sleep deprivation, irregular schedules, high stress, and sleeping on your back, which may be why so many historical accounts specifically describe the presence arriving while lying face up, exactly as Fuseli painted it, in 1781, more than 2 centuries before anyone could explain why. So think back to the question I asked you at the start. Has this ever happened to you? If it has, you weren't seeing a ghost, you weren't losing your mind, you weren't the only one. You were experiencing the exact same 3-part event that a Dutch doctor's patient described in 1664, that an English painter captured on canvas in 1781, that fishing villages in Newfoundland named the Old Hag, that a graduate student spent his entire career trying to explain, after it happened to him first, and that someone, somewhere, is almost certainly experiencing right now, while you're watching this, in a language you've never heard, describing it in words you wouldn't recognize, reaching for the same 3 ingredients anyway. A presence, a pressure, a paralysis. The room was real. The paralysis was real. The visitor was your own brain, doing something it has almost certainly been doing to human beings for as long as human beings have been sleeping on their backs, in the dark, waiting for the rest of themselves to catch up. Not a ghost story. A shared piece of human hardware, malfunctioning the exact same way, on every continent, in every century anyone bothered to write it down.